In this video series, we're going to learn about how to increase equity and access in education through the master scheduling process. In our education system today, student outcomes are still largely predictable by race, gender, and socioeconomic factors. That's partially because legacy scheduling practices continue to advantage some students over others. Within schools and districts, academic outcomes can vary widely for different groups of students.
In school systems and school districts, just like so many other places of our society, we see very dramatic opportunity gaps and achievement gaps across all underrepresented populations. And so what this might look like is that one group of students, we see a great deal of disparities in access and ultimately in their educational attainment over time.
So our work on Master Schedule has actually produced some pretty amazing results around both graduation and UC A to G rates, which is the college readiness rate. Graduation rates would inch up every year across our district, but we were flatlined around the UC A to G entrance requirements, and movement was very slow, maybe a percentage a year if we were lucky. We saw some amazing African American and Latino movement in the UC A to G category. One group moved almost 7% and another group moved almost 10%. And we believe that this was due to the fact that when you provide more access through the master schedule to kids, they rise to the occasion.
We don't often think about master scheduling as a lever for change, but it absolutely is. When it comes to educational equity, scheduling can help us move toward more equitable student outcomes and close the opportunity gap. So, how can we leverage the master scheduling process to focus on equity and serve all students in a way that meets their needs? Let's get into it. A great place to start is with data. To understand present state, conduct an audit of scheduling data to establish clear, quantified benchmarks. Most schools and districts have all the data they need to understand what is happening in their schools, but they just haven't figured out how to best leverage the insights it provides yet. Working with experts and established equity protocols that are out there, you can make sense of your data through an equity lens. Knowing how students are being served and identifying gaps in how they're doing is the first step.
In terms of who is graduating as well as who is going on to successful completion of college, we see a great disparity between underrepresented populations and typically represented populations.
Next, we need to articulate a desired state. Schools need to be able to define what equitable outcomes look like in order to move towards those outcomes. Make sure you can describe what gaps exist and what it might take to fix them. For example, your class compositions should reflect demographics of your student body for all courses. If they don't, that's a gap that needs to be addressed.
Those sequences that people placed you in your schedule in 9th grade were very difficult to get out of. If a student came out of 8th grade and someone perceived that their mathematics was not up to par, rather than putting them in grade level mathematics and pairing it with support to make sure they passed, that math perception, determinants were made school to school. An example of that would be engineering. We saw on some sites, they would put a prerequisite in. So you had to have passed a certain level of mathematics in order to get into engineering. Some kids didn't have access to them, and those were the most engaging courses in the master schedule, but they couldn't get in because somebody's perception of them was that they didn't have the math skills.
Remember, there will likely be many equity challenges within each school. They cannot all be fixed at once. So we recommend starting your schedule redesign by considering students most poorly served by current practices. Take a hard look at your current scheduling practices and start to identify opportunities to prioritize underserved students. For example, if you have low female enrollment in STEM courses, you may consider an explicit outreach or recruitment campaign during the course request process. And finally, equity work cannot be done in isolation. It requires teamwork from a diverse group of stakeholders. Be sure to gather multiple perspectives to identify gaps and problems and inform your new approach to scheduling. Most critically, be sure to include the perspective of groups who may be most underserved by your current schedule. Focus groups are a great way to include impacted groups. Consider hosting conversations with students, teachers, and parents to hear their frustrations and challenges, and gather ideas for solutions. This will add huge value and perspective to your process. And remember, change takes time, preparation, and support. Even radical change requires incremental phases and steps, so don't expect everything to happen at once. Thanks for watching. You can find more videos, worksheets, and other resources here.